anybody taught that, oh, speech really is violence, there's no distinction between directing an argument or ideas towards another person's brain and directing a bullet or a fist. No, those are basically the same thing. That's a pre-Enlightenment view. And what you'll descend into is pre-Enlightenment world where people killed each other all the time for their views.
We're not sure yet who killed Charlie Kirk and why. Here is what we do know, though. We know that Charlie Kirk's assassination was another link in a long chain of political violence in the US. Because only in the last few years, we have seen assassination attempts against Donald Trump. We have seen the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020. We have seen the January 6 riots. And we have seen the suspected murderer of the health insurance CEO reaching the status of a celebrity. And perhaps even more worrying than these incidents is the fact that political violence is approved, is accepted by a significant segment of the population. So here are some data, some numbers for you. 40% of young people found the assassination of the health insurance CEO by Luigi Mangione as somewhat acceptable or completely acceptable. So we have 40% of young people supporting practically a murderer. Or how about this? 1 in 2 young people who lean left said in an opinion poll that they would be okay with an attempt at the life of Donald Trump. 1 in 2. And this is not only a problem among the left, because someone could say, okay, this means that the left is out of control. But how about this? 1 in 4 Americans were okay with the pardon that Donald Trump gave to the January 6 rioters. And this is also a statement that political violence is okay, because that pardon was a blank check. Everyone and anyone who participated in this riot, you are now free. So today, at the Ayn Rand Institute's podcast, we will try to answer the question, why? Why are we accelerating our descent to the spiral of political violence? Why is it that more and more people see violence as the answer? So, Onkar, here we are again talking about another incident of political violence. So what are your first thoughts?
Well, the first thoughts is how tragic this is, or horrific this is, because as you said, we don't know who the killer is. The news this morning was there's a suspect or another suspect that they've taken in. We don't know the motive, but I think it's a good guess that Charlie Kirk was assassinated for his speech, for his political views, and a little bit wider, you could say, because he was sort of like an informal advisor to Trump. So for his political affiliations and participation in politics, that's going to be likely the motive for why he was targeted. So this is somebody targeted for speaking out and for participating in politics. And in that sense, it's terrorism. It's a politically motivated assassination. At least like that's everyone's sort of on the premise that the motive's going to be some form of that. And your mind went to, and I think rightly, to thinking of the atmosphere on campus and how young people think about this kind of violence, this kind of use of force and coercion. My mind went to, I think about that kind of thing, but yesterday was 9/11, and 9/11 was this massive terrorist attack on the U.S. And I think part of the aftermath, like we've talked a lot at ARI, immediately after 9/11, we spent a lot of time on the issue over these past 24 years. We've talked a lot about it, and one aspect of it, of its many bad consequences, is, I think, a lesson to take, unfortunately, from 9/11 is that political terrorism, so terrorism it has a political goal. It's actually effective. It actually works. And when that's seen on kind of the grand scale that 9/11 showed, you have to be on the premise that you're going to see not less of it, but more of it. So that was one. And another issue I think we should talk about is the kind of fear mongering. But again, 9/11 helped pave the way for this. The kind of fear mongering that we see in American politics, I think more broadly in the West, but here the focus is on American politics, given that Charlie Kirk, that's what he was involved in. The fear mongering that exists now also paves the way to make it more likely that you'll have, as in many of these cases, it seems like they're lone wolves, but they're sort of activated by a certain environment. And I think fear mongering is part of that environment, and it's worth talking about that as well.
But let me ask you something here, Onkar, because someone might say, what? You mentioned 9/11. Doesn't 9/11 give the opposite lesson that after 9/11, we attacked those who were behind it, so we made clear that terrorism does not work. So why do you think that 9/11 actually encouraged political violence?
Yeah, so it's true that the Western world, led by the U.S., took up arms, and we went into Afghanistan. For instance, I mean, that's the first, the counterattack or attack in self-defense. 24 years later, the Taliban is in power. They were in power, and they were shielding Osama bin Laden, and they've remained I mean, they had to flee a little bit, but they're back in power. I mean, and we withdrew from Afghanistan in such a humiliating way that if you're thinking longer range, and it's important that these Islamic terrorists, or the really totalitarians, they think long range. The long range is, yeah, like we're not defeated. We're back in power. And then, if you think more widely in the West, Iraq was a travesty. Iran was strengthened after 9/11. ISIS emerged after 9/11. So that, like, they had this possibility of having a kind of Islamic rule now more broadly through the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas were empowered and encouraged. It's part of why you get October 7th. That is, so there's a strengthening in that way, but I think most significantly and least appreciated is, so when we're talking about terrorism, it has a political goal. It's to change the politics in America. Like, so the attack on America is you're trying to change America's policy by resorting to force. And America politically is much worse 24 years after 9/11. Now, it's mostly self-inflicted wounds, but it's self-inflicted wounds as a consequence of our response and our failed response to 9/11. I don't think you could get the rise of Trump or MAGA without 9/11 and the failure to properly respond to 9/11. And Americans seeing that and thinking, we need something different. The establishment doesn't know what it's doing. The elites in power. And that's a massive political change. And more broadly, the populism that's risen in the West. I don't think you can understand that without understanding that it's in part a response to the failures of 9/11. So it's not, so political, when we're talking about this kind of terrorism, they're trying to have an outsized impact on, like, they're a small group. They can overthrow the U.S. government, but they're trying to make it change its direction and change course. And that 9/11 succeeded in doing, perhaps not in the way they fully thought, but their terrorists are not constructive. It's that they've helped undermine, destroy America. I think that is true. It's unfortunate, and it wasn't inevitable. That's what means that it was self-inflicted wounds. But it nevertheless is, you can see the causal steps after 9/11 of what happened.
Let me throw on the table a easier and more obvious and recent example where people get the idea that, yeah, political violence works. The summer of 2020. For weeks, we see neighborhoods burning, we see political violence, and what is the reaction of polite society? Oh, please, yes, we need to listen what you're saying. We're going to throw a lot of money to your cause. We're going to try to appease you. And this gives a message that whatever you're doing, it works. Whatever you're doing, it works. People who spoke against it, remember that crazy atmosphere of that time. People would lose their jobs for criticizing the Black Lives Matter movement. And this, again, the message is whatever you do, do more of the same. This is the currency of the realm. This is how we listen to you.
Yeah, the BLM protests, the atmosphere you're describing, it's hard to recapture it, of how much there was kowtowing and even excusing of the violence, of either like downplaying of the violence or excusing it in the sense of, well, what are they going to do? Nobody listens to them, so they have to riot and burn and smash windows and terrorize. And it was the kowtowing, and if you think again of it was both of politicians, of the mass media, and of the corporate world. I mean, so the pushback against DEI now, you can't understand without of seeing it as this was people resorting to these violent protests, and instead of people saying, like, this is beyond the pale, it's oh yeah, tell us what to do, tell us what to believe, tell us what policies to institute at our businesses, and we'll start doing that. And if that doesn't send a message that violence in the name of a kind of political goal, because part of the political goals were like defund the police, we need political change, and the way we're going to get it is through riots. And that sends a message that violence works, and particularly like political violence, terrorism works. And like that was on a massive scale.
And let us see then now, Onkar, who are the most vocal people in their advocacy of political violence? And it turns out they are the university-educated young people. And some of our viewers might find this baffling. Like, wait a minute, isn't education a defense against violence, a defense against barbarism? But here's another way of viewing this that will clear a bit this mystery. That such depravity, the depravity of celebrating the assassination of someone like Charlie Kirk, or the depravity of being excited while watching the terror of October 7 unfold. You'll find many of the people who celebrated the one event and the other, they're the same people. Such depravity literally requires training. Such moral decay needs to be curated. It's difficult for this to come easily. And this is where education gets in the picture. Because the education of these people, the education these people have received, has created a complete chaos in their brain. If we want to be a bit more specific, a conceptual chaos. Because they don't understand what particular terms mean, that they don't understand that terms have a particular meaning. They've been taught that there is no black and white, there's no right and wrong. Words and concepts, they're all relative. What does this mean in practice? For example, the term violence. In their mind, it has lost all meaning. And when violence loses all meaning, then real violence is normalized. Because if you're taught that capitalism is violence, or that questioning some part of the trans movement's narrative, for example, is violence. Or I remember where I grew up, there was a writing in the wall by some anarchists which says, Monday morning is violence. Well, if everything then is violence, then you have a right of self-defense against such violence. So, for example, if the ideas of someone like Jordan Peterson or someone like Ben Shapiro and their views, let's say, on the trans movement, if their views is violence, if their speech, their ideas is, quote, violence, then indeed activists can use violence as legitimate defense. And you realize that when many people adopt this worldview, that their ideas are violence, therefore I am legitimized to use violence against them, then the gates of the abyss are open. And we in the West, actually, I shouldn't say we, our intellectuals in the West for some time now have built this epistemological Tower of Babel. Remember from mythology, the Tower of Babel. It's people speaking different language, they don't understand each other, and the tower falls on their heads. We live in this tower where words don't have meaning anymore, and therefore we cannot communicate. It's like we speak a different language. By violence, I mean a punch or a bullet, but a university student might mean any disagreement with his worldview. And if there is such a chasm, such a gap, such a lack of communication, then real violence is the only way out of it. Because if it's impossible to persuade you, then I will punch you and you will punch me, and whoever punches harder, he's the one who will win. So, Onkar, I don't want to use terms such, oh, they have blood on their hands, but I think the intellectuals who have created this conceptual chaos have contributed to the violence that we see today.
Yes, one of the great, that's a very important point, because one of the great achievements of the Enlightenment in discovering and formulating the idea of individual rights, and then of governments dedicated to protecting individual rights, is to understand and to make the crucial distinction between speech and other forms of action that can infringe on someone's rights. But speech doesn't. Speech is not violence. It's the opposite of violence. You're directing ideas, not fists and guns, towards another person's brain. And they can judge your ideas, they can agree, disagree, engage in a counter argument, walk away because they disagree. That's what you can't do if you direct a bullet towards the other person's brain. And you call it education, but it's really miseducation. Anybody taught that, oh, speech really is violence, there's no distinction between directing an argument or ideas towards another person's brain and directing a bullet or a fist. No, those are basically the same thing. That's a pre-Enlightenment view. And what you'll descend into is pre-Enlightenment world where people killed each other all the time for their views. Part of what the Enlightenment was struggling against and trying to free itself from and develop something better is all the religious warfare that existed in Europe pre the Enlightenment. And they have no distinction between ideas and force. And there's deep reasons why they didn't have that distinction. So this is a monumental achievement that comes with the Enlightenment, and that you have professors in university who are not teaching that, but now teaching the opposite of that. It is deadly, and we're seeing this. And again, to get just how widespread this is part of what happened after 9/11. So the Danish cartoon crisis, when we're at war in the Middle East, and there was worries in Europe, and legitimate worries, that's part of what the cartoon crisis demonstrated, of self-censorship, that people were scared of discussing Islam in any kind of critical way and they feared we're going to be attacked and maybe even killed. So why even talk about it? So that's the idea of self-censorship. And this Danish newspaper ran a contest to see, is it real? Will people, and here it was cartoonists, will they depict Islam? Or are they too scared to do so? And many were too scared. Some cartoonists did it. And what you had was then rioting egged on in the Middle East. But the really significant thing is the Western world, politicians, academia, media, they turned against the Danish newspaper for doing this. And that's, in effect, it's like, well, your speech is an attack on Islam and Muslims, and so your speech is violence. You're the perpetrator. And this is the view, that speech is violence writ large, the journalists were attacked, went into hiding. The most mass media in the U.S., and I think it's true of Europe as well, would not show the cartoons. So you couldn't even inform yourself over what is the hubbub about. You couldn't, and the politicians, including like George Bush, blamed the newspaper for this, and that's the view that, oh yeah, your speech, you literally used violence. They're acting in self-defense. You're the perpetrator, and if that is such a recipe to encourage political violence, because it's again showing that it works.
And here's my hot take on this, Onkar. If a foreign power in any way threatens one of your citizens through a fatwa or through hiring hit squads, I think this should be an automatic casus belli, cause of war. Like, you retreat this within 24 hours, or I don't know, the F-35s are out, or we are at war. We are now enemies. And I don't know, I know this sounds extreme, but to me it's obvious that the job of the government is to protect its citizens. And particularly with the case of Rusty, you have the leader of a state proclaiming the fatwa. It's not even that we have to go and search them in caves. You have the leader of a country saying, I'm going to kill one of your citizens for his speech. And the first thing the government should say is, okay, now we're enemies. Now we are at war. Take this back or else. And of course, we didn't see that happening. Anyway, I want to ask you two more questions so that we make sure we understand this topic clearly. There's a lot of discussion out there these days that say, look, you people who talk about political violence, you are both siding it. You are saying, and I mean, in a way, we did this as well, that as I think we should. We mentioned January 6th. We mentioned that some time ago there was the assassination of some legislators, I think in Minnesota. There have been examples of political violence also from the right. But then they will say, this is very unfair because for every 10 violent acts of the left, our side has one, and the other side has more power, let's say, in the university and all that stuff. Therefore, you shouldn't both side it. What is your take on this, Onkar? Shall we focus more on the left since they are the Islamists because that's where most of the violence comes, or shall we quote unquote both side it?
Well, it depends what one's talking about. So I don't think there's two sides here. There's various kinds of factions and tribes, but they're very, very similar. And so part of the issue here is that what one's witnessing is that political violence works and political terrorism works. And the more that that's the lesson people will draw, the more you'll get it. And you'll get it from for every irrational viewpoint, every viewpoint that doesn't really spread by arguments. When they see that, oh yeah, you can use violence to further your cause, it's appealing to them. See, it has no appeal. That the fact that political violence is working, we're trying to spread a political philosophy in part. Objectivism is in part a political philosophy, but you can't spread it by violence. What we need is people's understanding. We're giving arguments, and we need them to understand those arguments and agree because of the reasons. It's useless if they just meld the words of objectivism and say, I'm for individual rights, and then everything they do is against individuals. They have to understand the case. And so the fact that political violence works, it's horrifying to us, but there's not a temptation, oh, maybe we'll use violence, because it can't further any rational ideas, but it can help further irrational ideas. And it attracts everybody, whatever the ideology, so long as the ideology is faith-based, irrational, not really grounded in reasons. And so that we see it, in effect, how people will put it, across the political spectrum, shouldn't be that surprising because there's so many views that are irrational across the political spectrum, so that you'll get the Black Lives Matter protesters will be yeah, we can use violence, and that's legitimate. That you'll have the Islamic totalitarians. Yeah, our viewpoint is irrational. We use violence to try to, and the more it shows to be successful, the more we'll do that. Um, Anti-abortion people, that viewpoint is essentially religious, faith-based. When political violence is shown to work, they get emboldened. Um, the if you take the you brought up the shootings in June in Minnesota of Democratic politicians, including that the person who's now going to be on trial had a list of other further Democrats he was going to go after. Luckily, he was stopped before there was even more political killing. It's dishonest to present it as though this is the radical left only. Um, and it's important to understand that it's not, and why it's not. That anybody like take so Trump's 4 minute speech, televised after Charlie Kirk's killing, is part it's stoking the flames, and the flames here are any fear mongering that you do that makes it seem like to the people listening, like we're under attack, real attack, and like the only resort is to meet violence and force with violence and force. The more you activate that dishonestly in people's minds, I view this as fear mongering. The more that you have to expect that people are going to start more and more resorting to violence, and that you see what Trump calls the radical left. People like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, when they demonize, and demonize is the right word, um, billionaires, Wall Street, financiers, drug companies. When you do that, when you say, like you brought this up, that this is part of what they're being taught on campuses, that this is, they're, it's literally the use of force and violence against you. That a CEO of a drug company gets gunned down, assassinated, in broad daylight, your fear mongering is activating. Like that seems in a person's mind. It's still like you have to be pretty gone and depraved to do this, but there are people like that, and you're in effect egging those people on. This is your only recourse. And the demonization, say, of immigrants, to take it now on the MAGA crowd, of we've got millions of rapists and murderers. Like, what if you really thought that that's what's roaming around, that you're going to resort to, like, I need a gun and start killing people, um, and then killing the politicians who have unleashed millions of rapists and murderers against us, and that's how they'll paint the Democrats. This is like, what can you expect other than people are going to start more and more resorting to violence to try to further their political end?
Right. And another issue I want to clear a bit in my head, and I'm sure many of our viewers also have this question, is this whole discussion about reaching out to the other side, discussing with the other side. So Charlie Kirk made a career out of talking to people with different political views at university campuses. So since his death, people have been talking about the importance of civility and the importance of debate. And I'm curious how you view this issue, because on the one hand, the philosophy of objectivism advocates the importance of free speech, absolutely condemns the initiation of force, of violence, but it also preaches the importance of ruthless judgment. So the question that this leaves in my head is, so shall I be civil and shall I be kind to, let's say, a communist or a fascist, for example? And particularly, this is a sensitive issue for myself, because when I had abhorrent views, the fact that some people were willing to be civil towards me, to not give up on me, to have debates and discussions with me, this is why I am here today. So I'm tempted to believe that talking more to each other could indeed lead to less violence and to a healthier public space. What do you think?
Yes, in a certain context. So there are many distinctions that need to be made. So it is true, if it is right of what I was saying, that there's massive amounts of demonization going on across the board of as I said, just take of people, drug companies, financiers, bankers, Wall Street, immigrants, mass media. If you actually take the time to talk to some of people in these various various industries, work, or just immigrants, so that's not an industry, but of people who've come to America, including people who are here illegally, which means they don't have the stamp of government permission of a bureaucrat that they're allowed to work or hold a job or buy a house. That's what it means, that they're illegal. They don't have government permission of bureaucrats. If you actually talk to these people, you'll find that the demonization is demonization, that they aren't the monsters that you're being led to believe, and that the leaders want you to believe, because the more you're in fear, the more you'll hand blanket power to people who say, oh, I can save you from this. You're in imminent danger of being destroyed. I alone, like take Trump's kind of rhetoric, I alone can save you. So actually talking to somebody in a who works in the pharmaceutical industry and find out what they do, the kinds of products how much we rely on them, how many lives they've saved, it will be really, and we're going to demonize so you would see the demonization for demonization, not, oh yeah, there's some plausibility to this, and that, like, talking across these kinds of camps and tribes and factions, you'll get a better view of people than what is being so much spread in the culture today. But that doesn't mean there aren't some people who are beyond the pale and should not be talked to, should not be treated as though they're misinformed, maybe like potentially reasonable. And here I would make a big divide between some of the leaders of these things who are deliberately fanning flames, fear mongering. So I don't think you can reach a Stephen Miller, for instance, about immigration and so on. But there's many people who support. I've met many people, Trump supporters, MAGA, who I think, yeah, you can reach, and you are giving yourself as a communist. There's a difference between the leaders who really know what they're doing, know what they mean, know what they're after, and the people who are more the followers and who've succumbed to some of these things, have some reasons, some not so good reasons for why they're attracted to this, but you can still reach them and talk to them, and it's worth trying to do that. But it's not blanket civility, it's not blanket forgiveness, it's certainly not look the other way or turn the other cheek. But on the other hand, people still are reachable, and you have to figure out who is, and you can't do that without trying to reach some of them and seeing how they actually think, if they're willing to think or not.
Right. So, and to my final thoughts on this topic is that because I was in academia when we went down this slippery slope, and I think my final thought is that violence is a slippery slope. So I've seen it all these years. I've seen it starting with heckling a speaker. Then it was they were banging doors when there was a lecture. Then it was ringing the fire alarm to disrupt the lecture. Then it got to assaulting them verbally. Then came the death threats. Then remember in around 2017, there was a public debate on whether it's okay to punch a Nazi. And serious people were debating that. Is it, well, he's a Nazi, maybe it's okay. Or in the UK, there was a serious public debate on whether it is a form of protest to throw milkshakes to the face of Nigel Farage. And I think that this legitimization of first a small incidents of violence led to where we are today. So I think the way to go from here is we should not be okay with people having to have bodyguards and former Navy SEALs to go to speak to a university. It's not okay that Ben Shapiro has to wear a bulletproof vest. And I think, Onkar, you also have experience with having to be scared and maybe wear a bulletproof vest to give a talk at a university. This should never happen again. Next time it happens, people who are the better people of that milieu should speak out about that. Like the universities should be mobilized. The administration should try to cooperate with the police. I don't know, the secret services. If there's a political milieu which poses such a threat that you need to bring bodyguards, this is a job for the police, and the job of the university is to kick them out. So this is the only way to say till here. This should never happen again. Not just singing kumbaya, but actually that next time we see that someone is threatened because of his ideas, there should be a mass mobilization by every serious person in this country. My fear, though, is that this is not going to happen. We've seen this also with Charlie Hebdo. In the first days, everyone was the sweet Charlie, and then we saw what happened. But to be honest, personally, I come from a country where we've had a big tradition of political terrorism. I've never felt so shocked as with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, although no need to say we're in completely different political barricades. So I hope this will shock people enough to be a turning point, but I don't know if it's going to be. What do you think?
Yes, I don't think it will be, but I agree with you that what is needed is zero tolerance for when someone is introducing force as his means of gaining political advantage. That should be, it doesn't matter what his views are, what his goals are, that should be beyond the pale. And unfortunately, it is so not beyond the pale today. Like we didn't talk much about this, but I think part of the environment and what's new in the 21st century is social media and the amount of threats, including death threats, that exist on social media that happen every day. It's basically anybody with a little bit controversial viewpoint gets, as on a regular basis, threats, including death threats. I was watching. So Charlie Kirk apparently got them all the time. I was watching his co-founder at Turning Point USA, who has drifted apart, and they disagree on many things. Said in high school he was a conservative. He used to get death threats, and Charlie Kirk helped him get over that and get. But like that, this is just a normal occurrence. I was watching someone who's a feminist and writes about something and says, "Yeah, every day, like on a bad day, I get like 20 to 200 death threats," and that this is normal now, and it is normal, unfortunately. That is so it's such the opposite of zero tolerance that I don't have a lot of confidence, but that the solution is the moment force, even like the threat of force, is introduced, that person is disqualified, and it like really should be viewed as beyond the pale.
I wish we could end up on a higher note, but this is where we are. Thank you very much for your time.